If all of the DNA in your body was stretched out end to end, it would go to the moon and back over 100,000 times. DNA packing is an incredible technology. At the heart of it is the nucleosome. 8 proteins are packed into a cluster, and the DNA wraps around it a couple of times. Then these nucleosomes coil and they supercoil and so forth to pack up the DNA. So these 8 proteins that make up the nucleosome are called histones, and this packing technology is found in all eukaryote species. So these histones are found throughout the eukaryote species, and therefore, if evolution is true, according to evolution, the histones must have evolved, must have been present in the common ancestor of all the eukaryotes. Now, what's interesting about these histone proteins is that they are highly conserved across the species. Histone 4 especially is highly conserved across the eukaryote species. You could look at widely different species and it varies only by a couple of amino acids. It's about 100 amino acids long, and only a few of those are seen to change. It's very highly conserved. Well, according to evolution, that means that those amino acids must be necessary. They must be necessary for fitness. You can't change them. Every time there was a mutation, that individual must have died off and not left any progeny. So they're highly conserved because they had to be. They have strict functional requirement according to evolutionary theory. So that's the prediction. Histone 4 cannot be changed very much, or else you lose fitness. It's not going to work. Well, if that's the prediction, it's pretty easy to test. Just mutate histone 4 and see what happens. Put it into an organism, see what happens when you mutate a few of the amino acids. Well, they tried that and they found that it didn't make any difference, at least not much difference. The organisms did just fine when you mutated histone 4 any number of places. The prediction of evolution, the necessary prediction of evolution, was falsified because you really can't have it any other way under evolutionary theory. If you observe all these histone 4s almost identical across all these different species, it's got to be not tolerated. Mutations must not be tolerated because they're going to happen. Why don't we observe more changes? They must be necessary. The sequence that we observe must be necessary. It must not be able to tolerate those mutations. So it really is a necessary prediction of evolution, and yet it's been found to be false over and over. So there you have a prediction of evolution and its falsification. So what? What's the outcome? Well, if I was an evolutionist, I would say there probably is a reason for that highly conserved histone 4 sequence. There probably is a reason or reasons for those 100 or so amino acids in that histone 4 sequence. They just haven't been discovered yet. But that's not going to help because this false prediction has left evolution in a no-win situation. Here's what I mean. Let's say no function, no reason for the highly conserved histone 4 sequence is ever discovered. Well, then you have a false prediction. Not good. But if a reason is discovered, it's going to be subtle and nuanced. After all, it hasn't been discovered yet. So it's not going to be obvious. It's going to be subtle. Maybe it's the need arises only under certain sets of circumstances or something like that, or it's some minor function that isn't really that important. Something is going on that's nuanced. If that's the case, then it's hard to understand how natural selection and how evolution would create this highly conserved sequence. So it's a problem either way at this point. Now there's something else worth noting here, and that is this is going to cause a problem, another problem, for protein evolution, which we looked at in false prediction number 5, protein evolution. So you have these histone 4 proteins with 100 amino acids or so that are highly conserved. If it's the case that you really can't tolerate any change to this sequence aside from a couple of amino acids, but essentially you can't tolerate much change to this sequence, it's an all or nothing affair. That was one of the problems we saw with protein evolution in false prediction number 5, that proteins don't show any signs of a gradual buildup. It's not as though proteins are made of smaller parts, which they themselves have their own function. And so you can imagine how there's these smaller subparts that evolve on their own, and then, they just happened to get together and they formed a protein. No, that's not how proteins work. That's not what we've learned about proteins. Proteins are an all or nothing affair. They work the way they work. Now, there are huge proteins that do consist of subparts, so you can imagine that for some huge proteins. But for your normal proteins, 100 amino acids, 200 amino acids long, they don't show a sign of gradual buildup. Well, what about histone 4 with its 100 amino acids or so that is highly conserved? If those are all required, there's no gradual buildup on that one. You have to have these 100 amino acids in place in order to get this thing working. How could that have evolved? Another problem is if we needed another one for the protein evolution problem, false prediction number 5. Religion drives science, and it matters.